Welcome to the Paul Adefarasin podcast. We revisit the word, surface the big ideas, and give you space to reflect, pray, and act. If you'd like the full message, though, you can watch it on YouTube or listen on Spotify after this episode.
Have you ever felt this deep, almost like a physical disconnect between the reality of your day-to-day life and, well, the greatness you actually feel called to?
Oh, absolutely. It's a very real feeling.
Right. Think about that for a second. It's not just some passing daydream. It's, a chronic ache. You know you're meant for more.
Yeah.
You can vividly imagine the impact you're supposed to be making, but your current circumstances look like absolutely nothing like that vision.
It's a huge gap.
It is. It feels like you're just sitting in the waiting room of your own destiny, watching the clock, just wondering if they are ever going to call your name.
It's an incredibly common, yet, deeply frustrating human experience. The tension between where we are right now and where we envision ourselves being, it creates this profound psychological friction.
And people hate friction.
Exactly. We hate it. So what usually happens is we just find a way to numb it. We settle.
We get...
Right. We discover that the most comfortable place to be, the familiar routine, the predictable paycheck, that same old social circle is actually the most detrimental environment for reaching our ultimate potential. Comfort, rather than failure, often turns out to be the real enemy of greatness.
Which, makes sense biologically, but spiritually it creates a massive crisis of purpose.
It really does.
And that tension between the gravity of comfort and the upward pull of a calling is the central theme we are exploring today on this deep dive.
And we've got some great source material for this.
Yes. We are looking at a really vibrant, highly strategic sermon. It was delivered on Sunday, May 10th, 2026, at House on the Rock Church.
Titled, Becoming What God Says You Can Be.
That's the one. So our mission for this deep dive is to distill the central spiritual truth of this message. We want to break down its key scriptural foundations, but
we're not stopping at theology.
Exactly. Most importantly, we want to extract the practical, everyday steps of faith. The sermon calls it the weekday work.
The weekday work, right. I love that phrase.
Me too. These are concrete things you can actually apply to your life tomorrow morning to bridge that gap. So to understand how to step into our calling, the sermon argues we first have to fundamentally change how we view our potential.
Which completely defies human logic, honestly.
Totally. The speaker grounds this whole concept in the Old Testament story of Abram.
Right. If we look at Genesis 12, God commands Abram to leave his country, his kindred, and his father's house.
Just pack up and go.
Exactly. It's an immediate call to abandon the familiar. And in return for this radical departure, God promises 9 specific blessings.
9 blessings.
Yeah, including making him a great nation, making his name great, and literally blessing all families of the earth through him.
Which sounds like an incredible promise on paper. But then, the sermon fast forwards to Genesis chapter 17 and 18.
And this is where the human logic just breaks down.
It shatters. Abram is now 99 years old. His wife, Sarai, is 90.
Decades past childbearing age.
Decades. They don't have a single child together, yet God shows up and fundamentally alters their identities. He changes their names. He changes Abram to Abraham, which translates to father of many nations.
Right.
And Sarai becomes Sarah, meaning noble mother of nations. And then he promises them a son within a year.
It's a staggering narrative pivot. And the speaker connects this Old Testament story to a New Testament truth in Romans 4.17.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Well, that verse says God calls those things, which be not as if they were.
But wait, hold on. It's incredibly easy for us to sit here thousands of years later and say, wow, what a hero of faith.
Sure.
But let's put ourselves in his actual sandals for a minute. The man is 99 years old. Think about the intense social embarrassment.
Oh, it would be awful.
Imagine being a 99-year-old childless man walking out of your tent one morning and demanding that everyone, your servants, your family, address you as father of many nations.
Sounds absurd.
If a guy in my neighborhood did that today, I wouldn't think he was having a spiritual awakening. I'd think he was losing his mind. How do we balance trusting God's future reality when our present reality looks completely opposite?
What's fascinating here is how the speaker frames this through a shift in how we perceive time. God sees the end from the beginning.
Right.
When God calls you by a name that contradicts your current reality, he isn't lying. And he isn't asking you to be delusional.
He's just early.
Basically.
Yeah.
He's operating on a future reality that simply hasn't materialized in our earthly timeline yet. So the central spiritual truth here is that God doesn't call you by what you are currently suffering through.
Okay.
He doesn't define you by your current limitations. He calls you by the destiny He has already placed inside you.
So he identifies you by your completion, not your construction phase.
Exactly.
Okay, but that raises a massive question. If God has this grand destiny planned, and he's already seen the end of it,
Yeah.
why is it so incredibly hard for us to actually step into it?
Why do we get stuck?
Yeah. Why are we always stuck in the construction phase?
This is where the sermon brilliantly bridges theology with modern biology. The speaker provides a physiological explanation for this spiritual problem.
Biological.
Yeah. The primary obstacle isn't always a lack of faith. It's actually our brains. The human brain is an absolute energy hawk.
An energy hawk, meaning what? It just hoards energy.
Yes. It only makes up about 2% of our body weight, but it consumes roughly 20% of our daily caloric energy.
Wow. 20%.
Right. So because of this massive demand, the brain is evolutionarily hardwired to conserve energy at all costs. And the most efficient way to do that is to take the path of least resistance.
Which means doing exactly what we've always done, running the old routines.
Precisely. The sermon breaks this down into a battle between the manual mind and the automatic mind.
So conscious versus subconscious.
Exactly. Your conscious manual mind is where inspiration happens. You listen to a deep dive like this, and your manual mind decides, I'm going to start that business. I'm going to change my life.
I'm going to wake up at 5 a.m. every day.
Right. But your automatic mind fiercely defends your old habits purely to save caloric energy. Deprogramming old behaviors requires immense mental exertion.
And your biological system fights it. The analogies in the sermon really bring this to life, like the thermostat analogy.
That's a great one.
He talks about setting the church sanctuary thermostat to 21 degrees. If the congregation comes in, starts jumping around, singing, generating all this body heat,
The temperature spikes?
the temperature spikes temporarily. But the moment that happens, the thermostat kicks on, the air conditioning blasts, the system fights to drag the room back down to its 21-degree baseline.
And our automatic mind does the exact same thing with our habits, our income levels, even our comfort with failure.
If you're subconsciously programmed to fail, your brain will literally fight your own success to maintain its baseline.
It's self-sabotage on a biological level. Another analogy he uses is an airplane's autopilot.
Oh.
A pilot only manually flies for a tiny fraction of the flight takeoff and landing. The autopilot handles the rest. We need our spiritual and practical lives to operate on automatic success.
But getting the autopilot reprogrammed is grueling. The speaker shared a story about moving to London in 1991.
Right from Nigeria.
Yeah, where he drove on the right side of the road. Suddenly, he has to manually retrain his brain to drive on the left side in the UK and shift gears with his left hand.
Talk about mental exhaustion.
He said his brain was screaming at him, telling him he was doing everything backward. It required total manual concentration until it became automatic.
So what does this all mean? It means your inability to change easily isn't necessarily a lack of faith.
It's just your brain resisting the new code. I love thinking about this, like a massive iOS update on your phone.
Oh, that's perfect.
Right. When you install a major update, the phone gets burning hot, the battery drains insanely fast, and for like 20 minutes, the screen goes black.
It's basically a useless brick.
Exactly. You can't make calls. Human spiritual rewiring feels the exact same way. You feel exhausted, uncomfortable, temporarily useless while the new code is writing.
Which transitions us perfectly into weekday work.
Right. Knowing our brains resist change, how do we actively force that update during the week?
The sermon gives actionable steps.
Yeah.
Step 1 ties back to Genesis 12, where Abram had to leave his father's house. You have to audit and change your circles.
Because familiarity breeds failure.
Yes. You must leave circles that keep you anchored to past perspectives and past performance. If people only know you for who you were, they will subconsciously hold you to that old baseline.
Because they want to conserve their own mental energy.
Exactly.
They don't want to manually recalculate who you are. If you've always been the funny, unreliable sidekick and suddenly you're a disciplined entrepreneur, your change forces them to change.
And they don't want to do that.
No. So they try to pull your thermostat back down. You cannot succeed in the land of the familiar if it hasn't worked for you yet.
But stepping away from the familiar brings up the fear of the unknown. We want a map. We want to see the whole route before we put the car in drive.
Step 2 from the sermon, swap the map for the GPS.
This is a crucial distinction in faith. God rarely gives you the whole map.
He acts as a turn-by-turn GPS.
Right. You have to be willing to leave without knowing the final destination. A GPS just says, turn right in 100 yards. It doesn't show you the traffic 50 miles ahead.
You just have to trust the voice. But as you follow that GPS and hit new levels of success, there's this insidious trap. Step 3, reject the retirement lie.
This is profound. In the kingdom of God, we don't retire, we re-aspire.
Re-aspire, I like that.
Complacency at one level of success is the exact barrier keeping you from the next level.
He uses financial benchmarks for this, and the neuroscience totally backs it up. Say your goal is to make $500,000.
Okay.
When you hit it, your brain releases a massive flood of dopamine. Your reward center lights up, says, "We survived, time to rest."
And it actively shuts down your drive.
Yes. The comfort of $500,000 prevents you from reaching $1 million. The moment you say, "I've made it," your automatic mind locks in that new baseline. Growth stalls.
To prevent that stalling, you need step 4. Protect your concentration.
Oh man, this one hit hard.
The speaker warns that one single minute of digital interruption can destroy 20 minutes of deep concentration.
Let the math on that sink in. 1 minute of checking an email or scrolling a timeline blows away 20 minutes of the manual focus required to rewire your brain.
If your phone buzzes 3 times in an hour.
You've lost the entire hour.
Exactly. And the sermon elevates this beyond a productivity hack. Concentration is a spiritual weapon used to embed God's truths into the heart.
Moving them from the manual mind into the automatic mind.
Right. If you're constantly distracted, you're spiritually interrupting the software update.
So by changing our circles, stepping out like a GPS, pushing past temporary success, and eliminating digital distractions, we are physically proving our faith.
Yes, but the physical and mental steps alone are insufficient without the spiritual engine driving them.
Which brings us to section 4, prayer.
But we need to be clear about how prayer is defined here. It's not a passive, quiet religious duty where you just list your complaints and hope for the best.
It's an aggressive tool for mental and spiritual transformation.
Exactly. The first prayer point is praying for the courage of discomfort.
Which completely flips the script. Instead of praying for God to remove the obstacles, you pray to become comfortable with the agony of growth.
It's an active act of trust. You're asking God to override your brain's biological desire for the path of least resistance.
God, make me okay with how hard this is.
Right. The second prayer focus is praying to compress time. The sermon references the Israelites. Their journey from Egypt to the Promised Land should have taken about 11 days.
But it took 40 years.
Because their mindsets were anchored in the slavery of their past.
They got out of slavery, but they couldn't get the slavery out of their automatic minds. Their internal thermostat kept resetting them to wandering in the desert.
Precisely. So the speaker instructs listeners to pray for the mental shifts required to accelerate their destiny, turning a 10-year journey into a 10-month journey.
Time compression through mental renewal. Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting.
The third prayer point.
Yeah, it's highly provocative. The speaker challenges people to actively thank God for their challenges, to literally thank the enemy for problems.
I know, it sounds counterintuitive.
I can hear people right now thinking, wait, you want me to thank God for my business failing or a betrayal? Does the sermon address the line between toxic positivity and an actual strategy?
It does, and it's a crucial distinction. The speaker isn't advocating for toxic positivity where you pretend a tragedy doesn't hurt.
Okay, good.
It's about recognizing the utility of the resistance. He uses the analogy of gravity.
Gravity.
Yeah, gravity constantly pulls us down. It limits us. It's a massive, relentless problem. But without the opposing force of gravity, we would never have been forced to study aerodynamics.
We'd never have invented the airplane.
Or the space rocket. The resistance is what forces the innovation.
Without a problem to solve, you never build the capacity to overcome it. This shifts you from being a victim in the waiting room to being a creator.
You partner with God to invent the antidotes to her problems.
So to summarize this incredible blueprint, God calls you by your future, not your past. He sees the Abraham inside the Abram.
But to reach it, you have to realize your biology is going to fight you.
Your automatic mind wants the familiar because it burns fewer calories, so you have to execute the weekday work. Audit your circles. Walk away from people demanding you stay the same.
Trade your map for God's GPS.
Reject the retirement lie. And use prayer as a tool to embrace discomfort and invent antidotes to your challenges.
It's a demanding message, but a deeply empowering one. It places the agency for change right back into your hands.
It really does. So as we wrap up, we want to leave you with a specific question to ponder. We've talked a lot about auditing your circles to escape people who anchor you, but let's flip the mirror. If God were to call you today by the name of your ultimate destiny, the thing you are meant to become, what name would he use?
That's a powerful question.
And secondly, what is one familiar comfort you need to walk away from tomorrow morning to start growing into it?
A vital question for anyone committed to this process.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it gave you the courage to start your weekday work. Till next time, keep digging deeper.
Thank you for listening. To go deeper, watch the full message on YouTube or listen to the full-length sermon on Spotify. Follow the podcast, and please share it with someone who needs it and leave your response in the Q&A. Kindly keep your heart on fire, your eyes on Jesus, knowing you are the exception. Grace and peace. We love you deeply.